Some people didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because the version of you they needed no longer existed. Carl Jung believed that every genuine transformation comes with a price. Sometimes that price is people. Not because you did something wrong, not because you stopped caring, but because the self they had grown attached to was quietly, irreversibly dissolving. What if losing them wasn't your punishment, but proof that your life had already begun to change? It usually starts so slowly you don't notice it happening. A friend stops replying the way they used to. Not cruelly, just less. A family member finds new reasons to end the phone call early. A partner who once memorized your every mood now looks at you like a language they no longer speak. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself people get busy, people change, people drift. But some nights, in the quiet after everyone has gone silent, a different question surfaces. Did I do something wrong? You replay conversations. You search for the moment you became too much or not enough. You apologize for things you're not even sure you did. This is one of the loneliest experiences a person can have, not the absence itself, but the not knowing why. And here is the strange part. Often, there was no betrayal, no dramatic falling out, no villain in the story at all, just two people walking at different speeds through different versions of themselves. Jung spent his life studying exactly this kind of invisible unraveling, not the loud endings, the quiet ones, the ones where nothing is technically wrong, and yet everything has already changed. But why does this happen to some people and not to everyone? To understand why this happens, you have to understand something Jung noticed about how human beings survive each other. We don't actually meet people as we are. We meet them through a mask. Jung called it the persona, the face we construct to move safely through the world. The agreeable version, the reliable one, the one who laughs at the right moments and never asks for too much. The persona isn't fake exactly. It's more like a translation, a way of making the raw, contradictory truth of who we are digestible to other people. The problem is that everyone around us falls in love with the translation. They build a relationship with the mask because the mask is what was offered to them. Think about the last person who told you, "You've changed." They almost never mean it as an observation. They mean, "I miss the version of you that made my life easier." And underneath the mask, quietly, something else has been waiting. Jung called this the shadow, everything we hid, denied, or were never allowed to become. Not evil, not dangerous, just unlived. The anger you were told was inappropriate, the ambition that felt selfish, the need for solitude that looked to others like rejection. For years, the shadow stays underground, and the persona keeps the peace. Then something happens. A loss, a diagnosis, a birthday that lands wrong, a silence that finally gets too loud to ignore, and the shadow starts asking to be let in. Jung had a word for what happens next. He called it individuation, the slow, often brutal process of becoming who you actually are instead of who you were trained to perform. It sounds inspiring when you say it like that. It rarely feels inspiring while it's happening. The strangest part is this. Sometimes the people who leave aren't rejecting who you've become. They're mourning the version of you that made them feel safe. Those are not the same thing. One is about you. The other was never about you at all. Here's the part almost no one prepares you for. The people around you did not fall in love with your individuation. They fell in love with your persona. They built years of trust, routine, affection, an entire emotional architecture around the version of you that made sense to them. So when you begin to change, even quietly, even gently, something in them senses it before you've said a single word. Not because they're villains, because change, even good change, feels like abandonment to the nervous system of someone who depended on your predictability. This is why the friend who once cheered your dreams suddenly turns cold when you finally start chasing them. This is why the family member praises your patience for years, then panics the moment you set a boundary. This is why some partners can tolerate almost anything except the one thing they can't control: you becoming someone they didn't choose. Growth reveals who loved you, and who only loved your convenience. It isn't always conscious. Most people don't wake up and decide to punish your growth, but unconsciously, growth in one person creates a kind of gravitational disturbance in everyone orbiting them. Jung believed the psyche seeks equilibrium, and so do relationships. If you were the one who absorbed the family's tension, softened every conflict, needed nothing, and suddenly you stop playing that role, the whole system feels the shift. Some people adjust, others quietly start to disappear, not out of hatred, out of a kind of unconscious grief for the version of you they could still control. There's a harder truth underneath this one, and it deserves to be said slowly. Some relationships only survive on the condition that you stay asleep. Not asleep in the sense of unintelligent, asleep in the Jungian sense, unaware of your own depths, disconnected from your shadow, still performing a self that was built for other people's comfort rather than your own truth. While you remain asleep, the relationship stays stable, because nothing threatens the existing order. Some people don't leave because you got worse. They leave because your healing exposes a wound they were never ready to look at. But the moment you begin to individuate, the moment you start listening to the parts of yourself you once buried, the relationship has two options. It evolves with you, or it cannot survive the light. This is not a moral failure on anyone's part. It's closer to a law of psychological gravity. Some bonds were formed cell by cell around a particular shape of you, and when that shape shifts, even slightly, the architecture can no longer hold. And this is where so many people misread their own story. They think, I lost them because I became difficult, when the more accurate sentence might be, I lost them because I stopped being available for a role I never should have played. The relationship didn't end when they left. It ended the day you stopped pretending. This is where the loneliness deepens before it eventually lifts. Because individuation doesn't just cost you other people, it costs you a version of yourself. Jung described this almost like a death, not a metaphorical one, but something the psyche experiences with real weight, real mourning. The old self, the one who kept everyone comfortable, has to be let go of before the truer self can take its place. And grief, even for a version of yourself you're glad to leave, is still grief. This is why people in the middle of real transformation often feel strangely fragile. Even when, from the outside, their life looks like it's finally coming together. They've started a new job that fits them. They've left a relationship that was quietly suffocating them. They've begun therapy or meditation or simply the slow work of telling the truth to themselves. And still, at night, there's an ache. Because the old self, flawed, small, over-accommodating as it was still home for a long time. And every genuine transformation requires walking out of a home you've outgrown into a life that doesn't exist yet. In that in-between space, people often find themselves alone. What if loneliness isn't the consequence, but the evidence? Not because they're unlovable, because they've temporarily stepped outside the identity that made them legible to the people who loved that identity. Jung believed this solitude, though painful, is not a malfunction. It's part of the architecture of becoming a self. He wrote about the individual's confrontation with their own psyche as something that could not be outsourced, could not be witnessed by committee. At some point, the work becomes yours alone. This doesn't mean you're meant to be permanently isolated. It means that some corridors in the psyche can only be walked through in silence, and the people who can't follow you there aren't failing you. They simply were never meant to walk that particular corridor. So maybe it's time to release a question you've been carrying far too heavily. What did I do to make them leave? Maybe for some of them, the honest answer is nothing. They fulfilled the role they were meant to fulfill. A season, a mirror, a rehearsal for a kind of love you hadn't learned to receive yet. And then that role ended, quietly, the way most true things end. Not everyone is meant to accompany every stage of your life. Some people are there to help build the self you needed to survive your 20s. Others exist to teach you what you'll no longer accept in your 30s. Some arrive purely to show you your own shadow, so you can finally stop being afraid of it. None of that makes them less real. It simply means their function in your becoming has completed. Jung never promised that individuation would be comfortable. He promised something quieter, and in some ways, more valuable. That it would be true, that beneath the loss, beneath the strange grief of growing past people who once felt permanent, there is a self waiting to be met. Not a perfected self, not self-free of shadow, a whole one. And a whole self, it turns out, cannot be built inside a room full of people who only ever loved your mask. So if they left while you were changing, let the story rest for a moment. Let it be simpler than betrayal. Let it be simpler than failure. Perhaps they didn't leave because you became impossible to love. Perhaps they left because, for the first time, you finally became impossible to abandon yourself.